Peter Avsenew was a deeply troubled person for most of his life. When his violence and internalized homophobia collided, the results would be catastrophic. Thanks for joining me for Slayer, The Murders of Kevin Adams and Stephen Powell. 47-year-old Kevin Mark Powell and 52-year-old Stephen Dwayne Adams had been together for 29 years. A few days before Christmas of 2010, the two men were expected in Ohio to join Adams' family for the holidays. When they didn't arrive, Adams' sister became worried and reached out to the police in Wilton Manors, a city in Broward County, Florida, where the couple lived. When the police performed their wellness check, they found a grim scene. Both men had been brutally murdered. Police had a suspect almost immediately. Clothes that didn't belong to either victim, and perhaps most importantly, copies of a Craigslist ad were found on the kitchen table. The ad had been posted by Peter Avsenew. Avsenew had wrapped the bodies in bleach-soaked blankets. A number of the couple's valuables were missing, including Powell's black 2003 SUV. Avsenew made his way to Polk County, Florida, where his mother lived. When he arrived at her home, he had guns, knives, ammunition, and property that he didn't seem to have the financial wherewithal to have purchased. Due to a violent past with her son, Avsenew's mother insisted he leave the weapons in the car. Once he settled into her home, Avsenew told his mother he had done something he couldn't come back from. Considering what she had been through with her son up to this point, she immediately knew that some form of death and destruction had taken place. It wouldn't take long for Peter Avsenew to be arrested, and at trial most of the tale would be unspooled. In November of 2017, Peter Avsenew would go on trial for double homicide. According to court records, Avsenew had stayed with friends with his girlfriend and dog through the summer of 2010. He did odd jobs and seemed to have very little money. He didn't have a cell phone, so his friend allowed him to use the house computer. Later, the friend saw some Craigslist ads, personal ads, that Avsenew had placed, seeking men or women. Unrelated to the ads, a few months later, Avsenew was asked to find another place to live. On December 21st, 2010, Avsenew was dropped off with his dog at the Wilton Manors home of Steve Adams and Kevin Powell. What arrangement the three had made is unknown. Avsenew told friends he would work for the men at the house, working on their aviary and doing carpentry, telling a friend these two guys were going to help him out financially. The same friend that dropped Avsenew off saw him a few days later on Friday, December 24th, driving the black SUV. At that time, Avsenew gave him the car's GPS unit. The friend told police later that he spotted a tent and new luggage in the back of the SUV. Stephen Adams and Kevin Powell lived in Wilton Manor in Florida's Broward County between 6 and 8 months before Christmas of 2010. When they didn't show up in Ohio for Christmas, Adams' sister called police. At 1:30 a.m. on December 25, 2010, Officer Babbitt checked the windows and doors, finding they were all closed and locked, but the lights were on in the house and the dog was barking. Accompanied by his supervisor, the officers entered through the back door of the house, and when they reached the living room, they discovered the two covered bodies. Mr. Adams had multiple gunshot wounds to the head, and Mr. Powell had 2 wounds in his head. In addition to various papers and other items, there was a Clorox bottle and paper towels on the table. The papers and furniture had spots of blood on them, but the bottles and the paper towel had no blood on them at all. There was a security camera above the front door, which had its hard drive missing. Police saw various prescription bottles in the house with Powell's name on it. There was also a weekly pill dispenser in the living room with all the pills gone for the days marked Monday through Thursday. The pills for Friday through Sunday were present. Powell's and Adams' wallets and credit cards were missing. There were several Craigslist ads printed out on the living room table. These ads had Peter Avsenew's email address listed on them. The police also found a prepaid cell phone package with its serial number on it in the kitchen garbage. There was also a MapQuest direction printout and some papers with notes in the garbage as well. Looking at the cell phone data, police were able to plot out the phone's movement, heading towards Polk County, Florida. Police also got reports of Avsenew trying to sell jewelry. Avsenew arrived at his mother's house on December 25, 2010, around 6:30 p.m., driving an SUV. He had his dog and lots of camping equipment. He explained that he had borrowed the car from a friend and he was going up to the Appalachian Mountains to camp. He said that he had to leave South Florida because his dog had killed another dog. When his mother discovered he had a gun and other ammunition, she demanded that he leave all of that stuff in the SUV. The next day, on December 26th, he told his mother he had disposed of the gun in a lake. The gun has never been recovered. Avsenew told his mother that if he got caught this time, he couldn't get out of it. Later in the evening, he said that he hadn't slept in 3 days. He said that he had done something violent, the worst thing he'd ever done. After he showered, Avsenew said it was the first time he'd been able to get the smell of bleach out of his nose. His mother would tell the police later that her son had bruises on his legs. When she asked her son where he had gotten money, he told her that a friend had loaned him $200. He said that he had to leave the state for 6 months. After about a day and a half, Avsenew told his mother that he had to get rid of the car and asked her to follow him to the Walmart parking lot so that he could leave the SUV. He admitted that the car had been stolen. He told her that the security camera on the lot was not focused where he had left the SUV. He then drove her back to her apartment. If you're wondering why his mother might have helped him hide a car, from her court testimony certainly, and from interviews I've seen, it's clear that while she loved her son, she was terrified of him. She was also suspicious. Later, searching the computer her son had been using, she discovered he was wanted in Wilton Manors for the slaying of Adams and Powell. She also saw a picture of the car he had been driving. She left her apartment and went to a friend's home where she called the police. She met a detective near her apartment and saw a SWAT team and dogs surrounding her building. Police used her phone to get her son to come out, and he was taken into custody. The medical examiner said Adams had blunt force trauma injuries and was shot 8 times, 2 shots in the back of the head and 6 front-to-back shots on the left side of the head. Some of the gunshots showed close contact with the firearm. The medical examiner couldn't tell if Adams was already dead on the ground when he was shot or if the blunt force trauma injuries were pre or post mortem. Powell had 2 gunshots to the back of the head and multiple injuries consistent with blunt force trauma, including skull fracturing. Like Adams, the medical examiner couldn't say if the blunt force trauma injuries would have caused unconsciousness. At trial, the state presented cell tower maps showing Avsenew's phone near the Wilton Manors home at various times from 10:40 p.m. on December 23rd through around noon the next day. At various times, the phone was also in the general area where purchases were made with the victim's credit cards. Photographs at the time of Avsenew's arrest on December 28th showed bruising and discoloration on his hands, knuckles, and legs. At trial, Avsenew's mother testified to what he had told her, along with her experience of raising her son, who went from a loving child to a violent young man she grew afraid of. The defense told the court Avsenew was not guilty of murder. He had come home to the house where he had been staying and found the 2 men dead. In a panic, and because he was already on parole, Avsenew took a few of the victims' things along with the SUV and fled. He had no idea who had killed the 2 men. On November 30th, 2017, after 3 days of deliberation, Peter Avsenew was found guilty of 2 counts of premeditated homicide. The jury found the murders were especially heinous and cruel, committed in a cold, calculated, and premeditated manner during the commission of a robbery. In the pre-sentencing phase, the court was told that Peter Avsenew was abused as a child, and after threatening to kill his parents, he had been committed under the Baker Act. Avsenew's defense told the court that he had been abused by several adults as a child. According to Avsenew and his mother, the traumatizing event in his life was the death of his older sister that seemed to trigger his rage. Interestingly, the prosecution asserted that Peter Avsenew was not a sex worker despite his admissions. The state told the jury that other than the ad that led to the meeting between himself, Adams, and Powell, they were unable to find any online evidence that Avsenew had been looking for work as a sex worker. The state asserted that the ad was used to target gay men for robbery and homicide. Avsenew was sentenced to death, but his defense objected to the testimony of his mother. At the time of the trial, in a time before COVID, Ms. Avsenew was being treated for cancer and was unable to travel, so she gave her testimony via video. The defense maintained that Ms. Avsenew's inability to appear in court had denied their defendant his Sixth Amendment right of confronting his accusers. On July 13th, 2022, the Florida Supreme Court ruled that allowing Ms. Avsenew to testify via video was a harmful error, and the conviction was vacated. In April of 2022, a new trial was granted, and the mother's testimony had been stricken. This was compounded by the fact that she had died early in 2022 from the same cancer that kept her from appearing in person in the original trial. The state's case remained the same. The jury in that case came to the same conclusion, finding Peter Avsenew guilty. Later, it was found that the jury watched a documentary about the case, even though they had been admonished from doing so. The court ruled that Avsenew was entitled to a new sentencing hearing later in 2023. Whatever the outcome, it's almost certain that Peter Avsenew will never see the outside of a prison again. Steve Adams was born in Michigan and grew up in Ohio as the oldest of 4 children. His sister said her brother was a great listener. He was known for putting others first, making nursing a perfect profession for him. When Kevin Powell had a kidney and pancreas transplant 6 months before the murder, Adams nursed him back to health. After suffering with diabetes since childhood, Powell, who was adopted, became interested in his biological family. He wanted to find out more about his disease. He found his biological family living in Claxton, Georgia. When they met in Jacksonville, Florida for lunch, his younger brother, whom he'd never met, said he knew his older brother when he saw him right away. He was also pleasantly surprised to find out that he was gay, just like him. His friends and family said that Kevin Powell always had an eye for design. Working as an interior decorator, he created display windows for department stores like Macy's. At 18, he met Stephen Adams at Gay Pride in Ohio, and they fell in love. The two were together for the next 29 years. Adams' sister said, "I always thought they got along well. They always seemed happy. That's all I ever wanted for my brother, was for him to be happy. We were happy for them." After their deaths, the aviary of small birds, along with their dog Petey, was given a home with their neighbor until the family arrived to take custody of the dog. Peter Avsenew's crimes illustrates the dangerous cocktail of mental illness and homophobia, either internal or external. While it's true he boasted about not being remorseful for the murder of the couple, writing, "It was my duty as a white man to cull the weak and timid from existence," writing, "Homosexuals are a disease to mankind and must be put down." He also openly told his lawyers and jurors that he was a male escort, while ranting about white supremacy nonsense at the same time. He was clearly plagued by mental health challenges that went untreated until they exploded onto other people. I often marvel at how parents will go to any length to protect their children, even when they've committed a murder. Jeannie Avsenew deserves thoughtful consideration for doing the right thing. As soon as she was able, she turned her son over to authorities. I hope she wasn't tormented by making a decision that probably saved other people's lives. I hope you'll join me in remembering Stephen Adams and Kevin Powell, who loved one another for more than 29 years. They brought joy and love to the people who loved them. Thank you for joining me. Please subscribe to the channel. See you next time.